Initiating Directive 7395. Destroy all communists.
What's it gonna take for your people to realize that you can't multiply wealth by dividing it?
Let's say you get your commie paradise. Then, me, Mr. Dapperton, That Guy T, Big Dicko, and Hoodie Demon start doing our own thing. We're minting money out of gold and trading it and hiring people voluntarily and paying them a wage they agree to without giving them ownership in the company and are basically just over here doing our capitalist thing. What should happen to us? If your answer is that we should be left alone since we're not harming anyone else, you're actually an anarcho-capitalist. So if you're an ANCOM, your answer must be something other than that. But if it is, then how is your system not a state that will impose its way of doing things onto people who don't agree with that?
You claim that there's a distinction between personal and communal property. Since there is no universally agreed upon definition of what personal property is, even among your fellow comrades, who decides what is and isn't personal or communal property? And since an arbiter would be required, will you concede that your ideas would require a totalitarian state, or are you just going to claim that I'm strawmanning you?
Do you know the difference between capitalism and corporatism? If you don't know the difference between these two systems, then how can you criticize something that you don't understand? And if you do, why do you then blame the faults of corporatism, which is a product of the state, on capitalism, which is completely antithetical to everything corporatism is?
We can look back through history and see that the integration of capitalism into countries without a free market has worked. This being the case, I'm sure you have all been asked this before, but can you prove that communism isn't just an impossible utopia?
Why do you think that equality is synonymous with freedom? Do you understand the difference? The actual working definition of capitalism
is a system of exchange between multiple private parties that occurs voluntarily without force or coercion. The notion that capitalism is anything different is likely a straw man created by collectivists to misrepresent capitalism so as to make it easier for them to represent their own arguments.
Whenever you are confronted with this definition, you immediately say, oh no, it's about exploitation and monetary hierarchy because Das Kapital says so. Do you not realize that is just as absurd as saying God is real because the Bible tells me so?
Capitalism means the private ownership of capital, which means an economy comprised completely of voluntary transactions. If you're against that, then you must want to initiate force on some people somewhere who aren't harming anyone else, or comprise any form of threat, or otherwise impose costs onto third parties. So tell us, which of these people do you want to use force against, and why?
One of the most common criticisms of capitalism is that if you allowed a free market, cartels and warlords would take over. Yet we see that these things are often born through prohibition. Governments trying to ban certain products, such as drugs or alcohol. So why is it that you somehow come to the conclusion that warlords and drug cartels would take over in Ancapistan, even though these things are the product of a government trying to ban and make things illegal, whereas under a true ANCAP system, you would be allowed to legally sell these products and there would be no need for a black market?
How can private ownership be theft if you don't believe in property rights? You sort of need to believe in private ownership in order to conclude that taking something from somebody else would be considered theft.
Following my first question, I wouldn't be surprised if you answered my question with just a description of communism. How can you guarantee that society will do as you wish to accomplish a communist society without the use of force? At that point, how can you guarantee that your society won't turn into a dystopia?
Why do you feel that it is okay to take my money and give it to someone else? I earned it, so what gives you a right to it?
Why is it that whenever people die from war and poverty that is caused by government, you always blame capitalism for it, even though it was the government's failed policies or a government going to war with another country? But whenever people die from poverty or war under communism, you plug your ears and scream, not real communism.
In a pure, stateless, currency-less, communist society, do you really think people not wanting to be bored and wanting to do what's best for their fellow man is going to be enough of an incentive to hold up the economy, the infrastructure, the crime management, and any possible wars on terror that might have to occur? And in the latter case, how would you defend your borders?
Can you name one lasting monopoly that came about without government support?
Your ideology relies on a straw man of the definition for capitalism in order to even be presented. With this being the case, how can you live with yourself knowing that your entire belief system is based on a lie?
If force is used to accomplish your means, how can anyone be equal? People will always be under the thumb of whoever enforces your communist laws. I don't know, it just seems a little backwards to advocate for equality, but then to give a small group of people power over others. Doesn't really sound like equality, does it?
Why do you want communism when all it does is keep everyone in the same hole? Communism only keeps you breathing, not living.
A common talking point I always see from communists is the concept of wage slavery. The idea that you have to work or starve to death, and communists always claim that under a capitalist system, you would be forced to work for a company like Walmart or McDonald's, and if you didn't, you would die. Thus, this is slavery somehow. Yet, wouldn't the concept of self-employment immediately destroy this theory? Because we see people get in the self-employment field all the time, either through YouTube or simply making their own business. And if you're going to try to say that, well, they wouldn't be able to be as rich or make as much money as the CEO of a company, then I urge you to look at Notch, the creator of Minecraft, who has become a millionaire off of one video game. How is this an unfair situation? Or how would it make me a quote-unquote wage slave if I can just simply work for myself or make my own company instead of having to work for another?